Hi, this is Karthik from Design School by Wpalgoridm.com. In this video, I'll explain Elementor Flexbox Container, which will be available in the coming Elementor versions, maybe 3.6 or something. And this is going to be the biggest change to Elementor since Elementor itself. And why is this even important, right? Here's an old structure, right? This is a tab that has sections and columns. I'll just click and drag in a heading widget into this. It has a section, it has a column. I'll just change the minimum height to something and I'll align the text onto the center. So this is the old structure. Now coming to the new Flexbox container, I'll just click and drag in the heading widget into the blank space and it creates a container and the heading. The reason why the Elementor Flexbox container is going to be the next big thing is for two reasons. The first one is that it reduces the code bloat, and second, it offers much higher design flexibility. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's start with the code bloat. So this is the heading widget with the section and column layout. I'll just minimize the side panel. I'll just right click on this heading widget. I'll just click on inspect element. And as you can see, this is the section, right? This section is, and after that, you can see there are tons of divs just for the section. After that, you have tons of divs just for columns, right? And then finally, you have your widget. So basically, there's a lot of divs going on, and multiply this with the number of sections on your page for a fairly complex layout, you have a lot of code that needs to be loaded. And partly that's one of the reasons why it's getting slow. Now here's the new Flexbox container. It just has a container. Note that you don't have sections or columns. It's just a container. So you can think of it as a box where you keep all your items. You can stack them no matter how you like. It's as simple as that. And I'll just click on this container. I'll add a minimum height. I'll try to align elements onto the center. Now I'll minimize the side panel for now. I'll just right click on this new structure, right click on element. And if you see this, basically you can see the number of divs are highly reduced per widget or per section. Since there is no column, there are no additional divs. Since there is no multiple columns within a section, there's just a container, and you can see that basically it has very fewer number of divs compared to this, right? I'll just again right click on this, right click on inspect element, and you can see there are tons of divs in here. Whereas if you see this code, the number of divs are highly reduced. This is for one section. Now multiply that and you're loading really less code, which means your websites will definitely load faster for a fairly complex layout. That's the reason number one. Now, what exactly is this Flexbox container and why you should care about this? This is fundamentally going to be the way you work with Elementor in later versions. For now, they'll slowly migrate people to it. I don't know how they're going to do it. They'll just remove columns and adjust all the widgets or layouts. I don't know how they're going to do it. Or maybe they'll give users an option to just have the sections and columns natively. So you can click on this and it's just a container element. Also, if you click on the widgets button under basic, now there's no inner section because there is no section itself. You just have a container. So you can think of container as a box. So within your box, you can stack your elements vertically, horizontally, and a combination of both, right? Basically, that's what this exactly is. So you can click on this container and it has width and height as usual, right? Like any CSS or HTML element, it has a width. You can set that width in pixels, right? You can click and drag your slider and you can set that in pixels, or you can set it in percentage, again relative to the page width, right? Or the body width. In this case, it stretches to the maximum width. If I set it to 100%, you can also set it to viewport width, which is the width of the window, browser window that you're watching. So that is responsive as well. You can also adjust the height of the container. Now within this container, you need to add all your elements. And down here, you have direction, align elements, justify elements, spacing, wrap, overflow. Overflow and HTML tags are the usual things that you have for sections and columns. Overflow just tells whether to overflow the elements out of the container or whether to hide that part if elements are overflowing. So if I set this to really less, now the overflow is default. If I set it to hidden, you don't see the overflowing part, right? So that's what overflow does. When the width of the container is less than content, you'll just specify what to do with it. An HTML tag, basically you can tell browsers or search engines what this section or container is all about. So that's a different thing. We'll get to all these options. Now I'll just increase the width of this container again. Now this is a heading widget. I'll again click on the widgets button. I'll just click and drag in an image, and you can see I can only drag the image above or below this, meaning it's acting as a column as of now. Let me pick my image. I'll just click on this image and I'll just pick this image, and this is my image, right? And this is the container. Now I'll click back on this container, and under direction you can see it's set to column, meaning all the elements that you drag within this container are stacked vertically, right? Column means vertical direction. So that's why you have your heading widget at the top and your image at the bottom. Now if you try to drag another widget, let's say text editor, you can either drag it above or below any of the widgets, right? Since all these are stacked vertically. Okay, how do you know whether the elements are stacked vertically or horizontally? You can click on the direction tab and you can change it per device. So it's set to column. Now watch what happens when I set it to row. All the elements are aligned horizontally, right? And you can also set it reversed row, meaning the opposite direction of row in the usual flow. You can also set it in the reversed column. You can see that the text editor widget in my original order was below this, but since I chose reverse column, it reversed the order of the elements, right? This is really neat when you want to make quick changes in responsive designs. So that's the direction. It specifies how the elements should be positioned within this container. As simple as that. Now what are these align items and justify content? You can tell content is related to the content within the container, right? Let's go with align items. Let me pick row first. And when I pick row, you can see the icons under align items and justify content are changing. Let me pick column, and you can see the directions of the icons are changing. Why is this so? Well, when you set the direction to row, all the elements are stacked horizontally, right? And when you pick column, all the elements are stacked vertically, and you can drag elements in the same order, right? So if I pick row, and when I try to drag in another widget, I can only drag in or stack it horizontally. I cannot do it vertically, and so on, right? And when I pick column, I can only drag it vertically. I cannot drag it horizontally, and that's what it means. Now what is this align items thing? So basically there are two options. One is to align items and the second one is to justify content. With direction, you're telling how the widgets should be positioned within this container. And within this container, we set the direction to column, so all the widgets will be positioned horizontally. Align items adjust the elements in the opposite axis as your flow. Since our flow is column, which is vertical, align items does that in the opposite axis, which is again the opposite of vertical is horizontal. And when I try to do that, when I try to pick any of the options, it's moving all of these widgets in the axis or in the direction opposite to the original flow. Our original flow is column, meaning vertical, but it's just doing this in the opposite axis or in the opposite direction, right? Whereas justify content works in the same direction as the flow, right? Our flow is column, which is vertical. So if I pick these options, well, nothing's happening. That's because we don't have enough height to stack these elements. Let me increase the height. Let me play with justify content options. And you can clearly see how the different options are playing out. Justify content also arranges the widgets in the direction which is the same as the flow, right? Here the flow is column and justify content aligns all the things in the same direction as column, which is vertical. Whereas align items arranges the elements in the opposite axis or in the opposite flow. Now let's change the flow to row. All the elements are stacked horizontally. Now when I pick row, you can see the icons or the rectangle bars are now vertical. Whereas for columns, the icons in align items were horizontal, right? That means the direction is opposite for align items. Whereas when I picked row, justify content is showing the bars in the horizontal direction, right? You have two bars next to each other just like in a row, meaning justify content occurs in the same direction as the flow, which is the row. So when I set the direction to row, all the widgets are aligned horizontally. Now when I try to align them, the aligning happens in the opposite direction, and opposite of horizontal thing is vertical. So all these elements are basically aligned in the vertical direction. Whereas justify content does that in the same axis. Now in this container, I have 4 widgets and I've set the direction to row, meaning all the elements are stacked horizontally. I'll just duplicate this container. I'll just click on the second duplicate container and I'll change the direction to column. And I'll also add minimum width to both, right? So that we can see things in action. Now that looks good. This is the first container and this is the second container. Within the first container, again, if I try to align items, the items are aligned in the opposite axis or in the vertical direction. And this direction is basically the one which is opposite to row. Whereas in the second container, whose flow is set to column, when I try to align items, all the items are aligned horizontally, meaning alignment happens in the opposite axis. Now back to the first container, justify content justifies the content. Well, there's not enough space to justify the content. Let us remove a couple of widgets in the first thing. I'll just click here. Now if I try to justify content in the first container, if I choose flex start, all the elements are pushed to the beginning of the row. Space around, all the elements have equal spaces around them, space evenly, they have even spaces, they're all centered within the row, and row is basically the direction of the container. So justify content does that in the same direction and align items does that in the opposite direction, no matter which you pick. Let's go back to the second container. If I try to justify content, all the elements are moved in the vertical direction because our direction is column and justifying happens in the same direction as the flow. And aligning items, it happens in the opposite axis. As simple as that, right? So we have few other options down here. Spacing is basically the space between the widgets. Now what is this wrap? I'll just pick the first container. I'll try to reduce the width and you can basically see that it has a nasty overflow problem. Of course, we can choose overflow to hidden and that will partly fix it, but we're also losing a part of the content, right? So when we set the width in absolute values such as pixels, and when the content is too small for the container, or when the things flow out of container, you can choose whether to wrap it around the container so that all of them are properly displayed, or you can choose no wrap. Let's choose wrap, and now you can see even though the container width is less than the content width in the regular flow, it adjusts all the elements in such a way that all of them are properly positioned, right? Well, now you might argue, well, we've picked wrap and it looks like all the elements are positioned vertically or stacked vertically. That's because the container had no other option, because there's no enough horizontal space, this direction which you specified, it's just wrapping it to the next row, right? These are still rows, but there are 3 individual rows in this, right? And if I increase the width just a bit slightly, well, still they're positioned vertically, but if I go on increasing the width, now you can see that this heading widget and this button widget are positioned or stacked horizontally, which is the flow or the direction in which we specified. Again, let's keep increasing the width to a fairly good amount. Now these two are stacked. Now let's keep increasing the width, and all three are positioned in the row. Well, that's what happens in the responsive mode. You can see how that affects the tablet devices, right? All of them are squished together, but you can simply choose wrap and display them so that they look good in those directions, right? So wrap basically wraps elements in the same direction. The container tries its best to align the items, right? So that's what wrap means. Again, let's change it to the tablet view. This is wrap in action. If I choose no wrap, this is how it's going to look like in tablet view. And if I pick wrap, I can also align content again. I can do flex start, flex end. Again, align is basically opposite direction to the wrap, and opposite of row is basically, well, vertical. So all things happen vertically, just like that. So that's what wrap does. The container tries to adjust the properties based on, or tries to align widgets the best it can in the allotted space or in the available space. Also, since now all we have is just a container, when you click on the plus button, you see different layouts in two-dimensional formats. Well, these are basically a set of containers nested into each other. You can start with this as a starting point. Maybe you can pick this. You can have a couple of images and then a button, right? You can drag in an image into this. Let me pick an image. Drag in another image into this container. Click and drag it. And let me pick this image. And down below you can have maybe text. So something like that, right? You can have multiple complex layouts and click on the plus button to get started. You can also do it in your regular flow. So let's say you just create a container, single container. Let's say you have a heading widget at the top, and below that, let's say you just want two images and then you want a button. So within this container, you can click and drag it right into this container itself. So within this parent container, you have a container which is nested. Also, this is a great way to nest elements. Previously, it was really horrible and really hard to nest elements, but now it's quite possible. So I'll just click on the inner container. Instead of column, I'll just choose row. I'll keep adding couple of images to this. Let me pick couple of images. I'll just pick this and let me drag another image. I'll just click and drag it, and I see a blue outline there within the main container. Let me pick my logo in here. Let me try to drag it properly. Click. Let's go into this container, and just like that, within this container we are able to put two elements. You can also drag another container within this nested container, so you can have an unlimited nesting option. I'll just click and drag it. Since the inner container's flow is set to row, you can only have it in the row. Again, let me do that again. I'll just click, and just like that, maybe here you can have a call to action or something, and so on. So there can be infinite nesting, and you can achieve quite complex layouts, all thanks to this brand new Flexbox container, right? Again, you can position the elements, you can manipulate the elements within each of the containers, you can change the order, you can do all that stuff. So nesting again is greatly improved using the Flexbox container. You have lesser number of divs, you have more design control, and you have less bloat. That is Flexbox container for you in a nutshell. And I'll tell you what, this is exact graphical translation of CSS framework called Flexbox. Elementor already had Flexbox implemented, but now it's more clear in a bloat free way. You have pure CSS Flexbox. It's translated into these graphical controls without having to write a single piece of code, and it works like magic. Since we are talking about nesting, you can think of container like a widget, right? Since we are nesting a container within a container, you can think of container as a box. So you can keep within a box, you can put individual items, or you can put smaller box, and that's what this nesting whole thing is. And within that smaller box, you can put either elements such as widgets, or you can put even smaller boxes, and that's how the nesting goes on. So because of that, now we have this parent container that has these three elements. The first element is a widget, right? I'm talking about the first nested container. The first one is this image or this logo, and the second one is basically another container nested into the nested container, this which has the call to action. And the third element is basically this logo or this image. You can click on the individual elements or containers, and under advanced tab, now you might see something different. Margin and padding are usually the same, but here you can see that there's a width option, and again you can change it per device, so you can have different width on different devices. So if I try to change the width of this, it's not actually affecting the image itself, but the container around the image, right? You can see that in action. But if I click on this widget, I see the width option. So you can adjust the width of the widgets, right, as per your liking. Second thing is there's something called align self. So that determines the order, right? You can choose whether to align this element irrespective of the order of the container that it's in. We'll get to that in a bit. And then there's order, and it has an option to start or to end, or you can set a custom option. So within this container, we have three elements. Two of them are widgets and another one is container. So I'll just click on this widget. I'll click on custom order and I'll give it an order of 1 or the number of 1. Well, nothing seems to happen or everything is messed up. So I'll click on this image and I'll just again click on the order, custom order. Let's give it an order of 3. This has an order 1 and this has order 3. Now I'll just click on the inner container that holds the call to action button. I'll click on custom order and let's give it 2. So just like that, we arrange the elements in the way we like. If I reduce it to 1 or 0, that comes to the first position. If I put it to 1, or let's increase the number. Now 1, 2, 3 are relative numbers. There can be anything. All it does is compare these numbers and arrange them in the increasing order. So if I have 10 in here, that will be the last element, because between 2, 3 and 10 is the largest number, and that's put at the end of the container direction, right? And the parent container has a direction of row. I'll just click on the first nested container, change this to column. I'll also have a minimum height to the column. Now we have minimum height and I can override them at an individual level, right? Since the container within this has align item set to flex end, I can override this at widget level. So I can click on this image and I can center it. If I don't do that, that's aligned onto the end, right? So you can override the align control or align using its individual control, right? Now that's basically getting the align direction from its parent container, and its parent has set it to end, but you can also override it. I'll click on the innermost nested container which has the call to action. I can choose flex start. I think it's a bit buggy, but usually when you use flex start, this whole container which is nested within this container should be at the top. This is since in its early days of testing. This is still in beta. By the time it comes out, all of these issues will be ironed out. And basically that's Elementor Flexbox in a nutshell. Without writing code, you have it with click of a button, and it's implemented well. And it's a great addition to Elementor, and this is fundamentally going to change the way we design and work with on our WordPress websites. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, keep watching, subscribe, and see ya.